That's a very familiar piece of music to a great portion of our audience, I would imagine. The theme to Dark Shadows. Between 1966 and 1971, the Gothic horror daytime series Dark Shadows left millions enraptured as they followed the macabre adventures of the Collins family. And as it turned out, when the show left television in 1971, the mystery of Collinwood may have only been just beginning, because the show has grown into a cult phenomenon with fans who watch it and discuss it every single day. And a big part of the program's success was the bewitching character of Angelique, played by actress Lara Parker. It's a great thrill for me to welcome Lara Parker to the show today, and I have to ask, as we start this interview off here, before you began your professional acting career, was there a specific movie or stage performance that you saw as a young girl that inspired you to go down that path?
I was really around 8 or 9 years old when I decided that I wanted to be an actress. I loved plays, and I started working in radio drama in Memphis, Tennessee, and tried to an audition for community theater from the time I was really young. The joke I tell is that I took ballet, but I wasn't very good. I took singing lessons, I wasn't very good, and I decided you don't have to be able to do anything to be an actress. So.
Now, you mentioned radio drama. That piqued my interest. What type of radio drama did you do?
Well, there was a Saturday afternoon show that I think paid $1.50, and it was very, it was mostly Grimm's and Anderson fairy tales, and they were dramatized, and the lady that ran it was usually kind of hard up for actors.
Mm-hmm.
But I started a long tradition of auditioning, and if there was anything to audition for, I would go. Sometimes I'd go 20, 30, 40 minutes I'd drive to audition for something. And so by the time I got to New York, I'd done a lot of plays, community theater, summer stock, college drama, and Dark Shadows was my first professional job.
Well, you must have been a little shell-shocked. That's like walking into the eye of a hurricane, having to learn all that dialogue day in and day out.
But when you're young, you don't question things as much. There was very little anxiety. It was just so wonderful to have a job. And I'm a quick study. I'm very good at learning lines, and I can usually keep them in my head for a day. So that wasn't a problem, and I was just thrilled. I was thrilled to be working professionally, working with people who operated cameras, and Dark Shadows had a lot of theater people in the cast. So they were all they were very interesting to work with.
Do you think that theater experience was something the producers were looking for? Because in a live theater situation, you've really got to be on your toes.
There were people who couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the producers were looking for people who had done theater because they would be able to learn their lines. But I do think they wanted people who had done classic drama, because the first intention was to make Dark Shadows, it had a different tone, a different mood. I think I got the first audition because I had done period drama. I'd done Shakespeare and Shaw and Congreve and Sheridan and in summer stock.
I see.
So I had played that type of role before, and I think that's how I got the part. But I don't know what they were looking for, to tell you the truth. I think they were looking for a replacement for Victoria when I first went in. So.
You've told this story before. I've heard you tell it, but I'd love for you to tell it again, how Jonathan Frid helped you a bit on your audition.
Well, I did an audition on camera with him, and the interesting thing is that the scene was a love scene. It was a scene between the lady's maid and Barnabas, who was the master of the house, and a dashing young soldier, and. In the scene, he's become enamored of and betrothed to her mistress. That's Josette, of course, and then she's the maid. But in the scene, it becomes very clear that he seduced her in Martinique, and he's now sorry he abandoned her. And so she just begs him not to leave her. She tells him how much she loves him. I did the scene once, and they wanted to do it again, and Jonathan leaned over and he said, in my ear, he said, "You know she's a witch." And, of course, I had no idea. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, she casts spells and all of that, you know." So I played the scene again, and this time I played it completely differently because at the very end, I looked at the camera and I gave it that hell has no fury like a woman scorned look with my big eyes. And I was leaving the studio to go get the subway home, and the hairdresser came running after me and kind of tugged at my hair and said, "What are we going to do with this? What are we going to do? We have to get you some hair pieces." That's when I realized that I'd gotten the part.
Aren't you afraid someone might see you in the servants' quarters?
I came here to tell you I'm sorry about what happened last night. I see no reason why we can't be good friends.
Merely good friends.
Anything else would be quite out of the question. You can see that, can't you?
I can only see one thing, Barnabas.
And what is that?
The real reason you came here.
Angelique.
You didn't come here just to tell me you wanted to be friends.
Yes, I did.
No, my darling, you could have told me that anywhere else in the house. You didn't have to come to my room to do it. But you did come. Oh, and I'm very glad.
Angelique, listen to me.
You cannot resist me, Barnabas. Just as I cannot resist you.
You don't understand now any more than you did last night.
Yes, I do understand. Our destiny was sealed those nights in Martinique. You haven't forgotten those nights, have you?
I will never forget them.
Nor will I. What we meant to each other those nights, that is the only reality. You understand? The only reality.
We're talking today with Lara Parker from Dark Shadows. And, you know, I think about the way television is constructed, and usually after a big dramatic scene and right before they go to commercial, the camera zooms in on, the actor's face, and there's a pause for a moment. And
usually there's a musical sting.
That's
dun,
right.
Dun, dun.
Yes,
Yeah.
and boy, oh boy, did you deliver those.
Oh, thank you.
Staring at the screen, it's almost like your eyes would widen, like, oh, she's got an idea.
Oh, yeah, right. I usually did.
Right. She's,
but, a lot of things went wrong on the set. So it
yeah.
all went on the air. We never edited. We never stopped. We never cut. Tombstones fell over because they were made out of styrofoam. And,
right.
Trees collapsed. And people stared at whipped around and looked at the teleprompter because they couldn't remember their lines, called each other by the wrong name. It was very exciting. It was like doing a play. It really was.
I have to admit, I didn't see Dark Shadows in its initial run. I was certainly on the planet, but I was a little too young.
You were too young, right.
But I did get to see it in the 80s when it came back on public television here.
Uh-huh.
And I remember putting it on for the first time, not really knowing what it was. And I was watching it and thinking, what the heck is this?
I know. It was different from anything else.
Yeah, this is one of the strangest shows I've ever seen.
It's very strange. Yes, it's very strange. But for a lot of people, it's completely mesmerizing. I mean, there are people who go to sleep with it and people who watch it every day. And there are so many fan clubs. I mean, if you go on Facebook, there must be 20 or 30 different fan clubs just on Facebook alone, and maybe thousands of people still watch it religiously, and they're addicted to it. So.
And there's so much of it.
And there's so much of it, yeah. There's over 1,100 episodes.
Right, and then there are movies, and they've had revivals. I think, obviously, people remember the original most fondly. I want to ask you about Jonathan Frid becoming a very unlikely sex symbol at the time. He seemed surprised by it.
Well, we were all surprised by it. But he had a lot going for him. He was a Shakespearean actor. He'd studied in London. He'd studied classical stage acting, and he had a wonderful presence. a powerful voice. He had a wonderful kind of Roman nose, and there was no one. It was just like Dark Shadows. There was no one playing a hero that was anything like him. And women just fell in love with him. But I think they fell in love with two things. I think they fell in love with his mystery. He was enigmatic. He was volatile. He was strong-willed. He was frightening. And then they fell in love with the whole idea of a vampire. I mean, if this is in the afternoon,
Sure.
During the day, you're doing your ironing, and this man comes on the screen who wants to, take you in his arms, and then instead of kissing you, he wants to bite you. I don't know. I think it was the 60s,
Of course.
There's a lot weird going on in the 60s. And it was so uniquely different. It was so surprising. It was titillating, and it was true escapism. And, yeah, women fell in love with him. Piles and piles and piles of fan mail letters. Women wanting him to bite them. I know. It's ridiculous when we think about it now. I mean, I don't really understand why people like vampires. I write novels. I write vampire novels, and I write scenes with vampires, and I don't understand why that gets people jazzed up. I really don't. I mean, I think it's kind of disgusting, but it's definitely a metaphor for sex.
Yes.
So,
and also I think someone who's sort of tortured with their own identity, especially the way he played the character. He was very clever. From the very beginning, he played the vampire as in anguish over his state, that he had to go out and drink blood, that he was truly a good and moral person who didn't want to have to do that. He played against type. He didn't play the Bela Lugosi type at all. He played the tortured, reluctant vampire. But he still would do it. I mean, yes.
He would still bite, but then he would feel sorry.
And that was Jonathan Frid with I'll Be With You Always from the Dark Shadows tie-in album of 1969. Our guest today on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop is actress Lara Parker from Dark Shadows. We talked a little bit about the kind of letters Jonathan Frid was receiving at the time. I'm assuming that you probably got a lot of letters from young men who were watching the show and were interested in you. And I would guess you had your share of female fans too, huh?
Most of my letters came from people, both sexes, who saw me as a role model, someone who was strong-willed, and when people didn't do what she told them to do, they were sorry. She made them sorry.
Mm.
I think I represented, at a particular time in history, one of the first liberated women.
Mm.
And many, many adolescents told me that I got them through a rough period in their lives because they identified with me and they thought how great it would be if they could just cast a spell on someone who had said a mean thing or bullied them or treated them with less respect than they felt they deserved. And they thought that, to be Angelique, when she came on the scene, everybody went, oh, here she comes, what is she going to do now? And it was great because I have a really shy personality, and it was hard for me to be able to play those scenes. It took me a long time, and I remember when I first started, I played them kind of weepy. I felt really sorry for my character because she'd been seduced and she'd been dumped, and she was stuck being a servant. And that's another thing. Jonathan came to me and he said, you should really stop all your moaning and crying. You're the heavy. And I said, what? He said, you're the villain. Don't you know that? And I went, oh, no. And he said, yes, you are. And it is a much better role than being the heroine, because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Josette. I mean, I was a young actress. I wanted to be, the charmer, the heroine.
Right.
I said, but I don't know how to play this. I've never been jealous. I've never hated anyone. He said, dig deep, you'll find it. And it took me a while. It took me a while to be able to assume that kind of strength and the power that Angelique ended up having in the later scenes, because I had to work to find that within myself, and it was quite liberating. And I think that I was worshipped, well, not me, my character, by young girls, but also young boys who were maybe had problems defining who they were, and they saw her as a model, a role model. So I got a lot of letters that said that anyway.
But you never thought, all these years later, that you'd be on the phone with somebody talking about Dark Shadows?
No, absolutely not. We thought when the show went off the air, I mean, we never expected to see it again. In fact, we would tape the show, and then we would go in the green room and we'd see the show that we had taped last week that that was airing. Mm-hmm. And we'd wince and cringe and go, "Oh my God, I'm so terrible!" And then we say, "Oh well, it's gone. Nobody will ever see that again." And we just kind of wash our hands of it and go home and go, "I'm so relieved that it's over, and I hope not that many people watched it." And of course, we never dreamed that it would end up having a cult following.
I summon the eye of fire that burns within the icy eye that watches over all things evil. I call it to this room of my own creation. Heart of fire, heart of ice, fiery eye of coldest evil. Burn. I command you to come and burn. Burn. Burn.
Lots of stuff things for you.
Our guest today on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop is actress Lara Parker, who played the part of Angelique on Dark Shadows. You know, as I look over your resume, it's an impressive resume with dozens of movies and TV roles. But I would think that as an actor, being associated with something in the horror genre is almost like being part of the mafia. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's been a blessing or a curse?
There were a couple of times when I didn't get parts because the head of the studio or the producer said, "She can't play a heroine, she's a heavy." But not that many. I mean, I got to play a lot of ordinary women who... Often I was I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I don't think it really, I don't know, you go on auditions, you get it or you don't get it. It's kind of the way it is. But I do think that as far as in writing novels, that I kind of wish that I had not started out writing Dark Shadows novels and vampire novels, because I do think that it would be very hard for me to get anything else published besides that. And
I want to talk about your novels because your first one, Angelique's Descent, I'm a little confused because I think it was written in the 90s but then was re-released?
Yes. When the movie came out with Johnny Depp, they reprinted it. It was first time printed by HarperCollins, and then Tor took over the books, and they made those wonderful covers. I think they did a really nice job. And it was sold in France, and in Spain, and in Portugal, and Hungary, and Bulgaria, and all because of the movie. The movie wasn't a hugely successful movie, but it created a lot of press.
I think overseas it was a big movie, though.
Yeah, it did okay. I mean, it didn't do what we hoped, which was start a franchise with many more movies, all with Johnny Depp. That didn't happen because I think they made a mistake by making it so silly. But it did garner us hundreds and hundreds of new fans, and so they reprinted the first two books again.
Right, Angelique's Descent, which is
the
one...
And the Salem Branch, yeah, right. I had already written those. And then the third one came out, Wolf Moon Rising, and now I'm working on a book about Victoria called The Heiress of Collinwood.
When you sit down to write these books, now obviously you worked on the show, so you know Well, I can't assume that, because I speak to a lot of actors who work on a program, and then they think, they tell me, in order to do this, or to talk about this, I had to go back and watch a lot of these episodes and familiarize myself with the plot. Is that something that you have to do?
Yes, I've watched a lot of episodes. I mean, I'm familiar with the characters because I acted with them and I can still see them in my mind's eye, but I don't remember the storylines very well. And there is a canon which the fans prefer the novels adhere to.
I see, yes.
You can't call someone who's your uncle your brother, for instance, or
right.
You have to describe the great house the way it was actually furnished.
Right.
But other than that, what I've tried to do in the novels is to just introduce entirely new storylines. And this, of course, upsets the fans. They want to see the same stories told over and over and over again because they love them so much. But that's not any fun for a writer.
No, and you want to expand the universe.
I want to carry it forward as though the show were still on the air.
Right.
And I know from experience that those plots went in all different directions, and they were always surprising, and the twists and turns were the things that kept people watching. So you have to come up with new stuff. So I've tried to do that.
Well, I'm enjoying it. I'm reading Angelique's Descent.
Oh, good.
And I'm a fan of gothic horror, which is what I would consider that novel. But let me ask you, well, two things. I know, are you recording, or have you just finished recording an audio version?
Yes, I've recorded the first 3 books for Audible. I've just finished. I'm not sure when they'll be released, but I should think it will be in the next month or so.
I would say people would just go to your website, which I believe is it laraparker.com?
Yes, or Lara Parker Blogspot. Yeah.
And on Facebook too.
Yeah, and on Facebook. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned writing these gothic horror novels, and that might not have been your first choice. What would you have liked to have started with?
Well, I went back to school and I got a master's in creative writing, and I would like to write literary fiction and write short stories and write. I started out writing screenplays. I wrote 3 screenplays, but because these are in the Dark Shadows world, they're TV tie-ins. People see them as TV tie-ins. So I don't get the reviews, I don't get the respect that I would have gotten if I had published a novel. On the other hand, I might have written 10 novels and never gotten one published. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's wonderful to be published, to hold a book in your hand that you wrote, On the other hand, I kind of wish that I could have escaped the Dark Shadows world, because in a sense they own the books, I don't. So
right.
But I've really enjoyed it, and I love the fans, and I love the show, and I feel blessed that I'm still a part of it. We're going to have our 50th, what's it called?
Is it the 50th anniversary?
Anniversary. We're going to have the 50th anniversary in 2016
My goodness.
When the show went on the air. Hard to believe. That's why I couldn't think of the word, because I'm so old.
Oh, now wait a minute here. I've seen recent photos of you, and you look pretty darn good.
Yeah, but a lot of times that I just lose the word, I don't know how I do it, but I do.
Well, yes, 1966, right? So the 50th anniversary will be next year of Dark Shadows.
But it's going to be a very big deal. I think they're going to try to get as many members of the cast who are still alive to show up. And I'm sure that the fans are all planning to come because, there's some diehard fans out there, several hundred who come every year, and it's wonderful. It really is. A lot of them have become my friends. I really look forward to seeing them and spending time with them, and I exchange emails throughout the year, and I care about their families and what they're doing, and of course, it's always wonderful seeing the members of the cast. I'm good friends with Catherine Lee Scott and Jerry Lacey and Chris Pennick and Marie Wallace and Nancy Barrett and a lot of the actors who were on the show.
So it'll be a family reunion next year.
It's like a huge family reunion. It's like a huge family or a mini Star Trek.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you something that's non-Dark Shadows related. There are other things I'd like to get into here, but I have to ask you about working with Jack Lemmon.
Oh, yeah.
What was that experience like? I'm talking about Save the Tiger. I should tell the
Yes,
audience, Save the Tiger, yeah.
Well, the best story is that Steve Shagan was the director, and when I did the scene where I played a prostitute, and my John had a heart attack and died. And at the beginning of that scene, I don't know her name, but there was another actress who was in the scene with me, and he wanted us to embrace and kiss the actress and me. Of course, again, this was a long time ago. This was before you showed anything of that kind.
Right.
And, I felt terrible about it because I didn't think it was motivated and it wasn't in the script. And I had this strong feeling that it was being done, for titillation reasons.
Sure.
And it was totally extraneous in every respect.
Right. Exploitive.
It was
yes.
exploitive, but because I was, a good little actress, I did as I was told. And the next morning, I showed up on the set, and Jack Lemmon came over to me, and he said, how are you doing this morning? I said, well, I really hated the way the scene went yesterday. And he said, my dear, don't worry, none of that will be in the film. So, he had a sense of how uncomfortable I was, and he also had good taste, and he was wonderful to me. The scene we did in the restaurant, he was the best. He has this kind of magic thing he does. You've heard that, right? He says magic time right before you start
right.
the scene. Yeah, they say quiet on the set, and the sound guy says speed, and the director says action, and then Jack Lemmon says magic time, which always gives you chills because you realize, you're in this wonderful situation where you get to play this role and create magic, and kind of brings it home.
When he said magic time, he created it too.
He did, yes.
What a remarkable actor. He could do everything. Comedy, he'd be the funniest person in the room, he'd make you cry.
And he won the Oscar for that movie, right?
Yes, he did.
And the first thing out of his mouth was he thanked the cast, all the supporting actors. I know in his speech he said that at some point, and I thought, I was one of those.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being so
you're
gracious
welcome.
with your time here and sharing this with us.
I've enjoyed it.
Well, so have I, and I'm going to enjoy reading the rest of Angelique's Descent.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I hope the next book is coming sooner rather than later. And
well, I'm still working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, publishers take a long time.
That's true.
Once they get it, you say goodbye to it for a couple of years because they just take forever. Sooner or later, it will appear.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, and you have a great rest of your day.
You too.